Hello, welcome to the channel Y Stories. Enjoy watching.
In the cold hospital corridor, a man sat. It was the most nerve-wracking day of his entire time working at this clinic. His profession was not an easy one, pathologist. But he had never been worried. What could go wrong in his field? But today, Chelo couldn't find his place because he was at the hospital not for work. Behind the door, they were operating on his wife. There was a reason to worry, because Adela had heart problems. The slightest mistake and the woman would never kiss her husband or hug her son again. Gonzalo was worried because it had already been 2 hours with no news. He paced back and forth, trying to push away negative thoughts. He was sure in the surgeon, a good friend and an excellent specialist. But even the best have bad days. Every 10 minutes, his son sent a message. "Is it over yet?" And every time Chelo replied to Antonio, "I will write when it's over." But how can you calm a boy who is worried about his mom? The door opened, and the doctor came out of the operating room. His face spoke volumes. "I did everything I could," said Senor Delgado, and put his hand on his colleague's shoulder. Tears welled up in Chelo's eyes immediately. He begged to say that everything was fine, but Anton just hung his head and nodded guiltily. Adela didn't make it, her heart stopped. There were no culprits in this situation, her time had just come. The woman had long been fighting the illness. It wasn't her first surgery, but this time her body couldn't handle another intervention. Both Chelo and Adela were warned that this outcome was possible, but they decided it was better to use the chance than not to try to save her. Assistants were coming out of the operating room. Each one approached Chelo and hugged him. They knew how much he cared for his wife. It was time for another message. Gonzalo didn't write it, he called his son. "It's over, my boy," Chelo said somberly. "Mom is no longer with us. It's your fault." Antonio screamed and hung up. The man didn't take those words to heart. He knew that his son would eventually recover from the shock and ask for forgiveness. Of course, Chelo wasn't to blame for what happened. Antonio blamed his father for not dissuading his mother from the surgery. The boy didn't understand that she was already destined to die, but the surgery offered a slim chance at salvation. Can you explain anything to a person in the midst of puberty? For him, his father was now his mother's murderer. Whether he was actually guilty or not didn't matter. Gonzalo said he would perform the autopsy and issue the death certificate himself. No one resisted his decision. The man sat by his wife for a long time. He asked for her forgiveness, talked about their love, and promised to take care of their son. Chelo remembered the moments when he was happy with his wife. They had tried for a long time to have a child, and when Antonio was born, they were overjoyed. With Adela, Chelo buried his own life. It no longer had any meaning for him. The man practically lived in the morgue, next to his wife's body. He was slowly losing his mind. Chelo talked to Adela. He thought she was responding to him, laughing at his jokes. Senor Molina, the chief doctor of the clinic, was about to worry. He knew that the man had a son who had been left to fend for himself all this time, living alone. Tony, however, never thought about his father. He suffered too, but at home. The boy closed himself in the apartment and didn't go out anywhere. Only on the day before the funeral did Chelo return home. They didn't exchange a word, just looked apathetically at each other and went to their separate corners. Relationships with his son deteriorated for Gonzalo after his wife's death. The boy was 15 years old, a very difficult age. He was already starting to show his character, but Adela, as a mother, had an influence on him and could appeal to his conscience. The young man didn't take his father seriously at all. Chelo knew only one method of upbringing, punishment and scolding. But the son didn't listen to him much, and Chelo didn't have the opportunity to check whether the child followed his instructions because the man often stayed late at work, taking night shifts. The boy was left to his own devices during that time. Several times Chelo had to pick up his son from the police department. Once he stole a chocolate bar from a store, another time he got into a fight with a boy from a neighboring street, and yet another time he broke a car window. The climax of this story was a conversation with the school principal. Chelo was called for a meeting. Besides the principal, the teachers, the class teacher, and the deputy head were in the office. All of them said that Antonio would have to repeat the year and that he didn't listen to teachers and bullied classmates. The boy was practically lynched by the entire teaching staff. Chelo couldn't lift his eyes out of shame. In the end, Antonio announced that he hated them all and ran out of the office. The father wanted to chase after him, but the principal stopped him. "Are you going to keep chasing after the boy?" she asked sternly. "Where is your masculine backbone? Show your character. You see, he doesn't respect anyone." "Absolutely right," added the class teacher. "He has changed a lot. I believe you've lost control over your child. He needs a good thrashing and to be forced to hit the books." Chelo listened to all these terrible words directed at his son and himself. He now understood Antonio very well. He also wanted to send everyone away and escape from this oppressive atmosphere. "Why are you silent?" the principal persisted. "Say something. You're responsible for your son. What measures will you take?" "You asked where my masculine character went," Chelo said after some thought. "I buried it together with my wife a month ago. Antonio is in deep depression. He lost his mother, and you've created some kind of mess here. Sonora de la Cruz, instead of convening a pedagogical council and vilifying my son as a class teacher, you could have inquired about what's happening in your students' families." The teachers gasped loudly, some blushed with shame. Indeed, no one knew what had happened to Antonio's mom. The boy didn't tell anyone about it. Chelo didn't inform the school either, but he regretted it now. Perhaps, in that way, this situation could have been avoided. "We're so sorry, we weren't aware," the principal spoke first, and everyone immediately picked up her words and also started apologizing. "You asked what measures I will take," Chelo continued, ignoring the apologies. "First of all, I will transfer my son to another school. To one where they care about the mental health of their students, not just the school's prestige." Gonzalo got up from his chair and left the office with his head held high. The teachers instantly shifted their focus to Sonora de la Cruz. Now they saw her as the culprit, as she didn't find out about the tragedy that had happened to Antonio. Now, if anything happened to Antonio, his father would blame the school for everything. Chelo still couldn't find his son. The boy didn't answer his calls either. The man was worried, hoping that his son wouldn't do anything to harm himself, because he knew how humiliating and painful such a public scolding could be. Antonio was found at home. He had locked himself in his room, loudly listening to music. He refused to talk to his father. Chelo didn't try to approach him and decided to talk to his son when he calms down a bit. Lunchtime passed, and it was time for Gonzalo to return to work. Antonio didn't even notice that his dad had left. At work, Gonzalo was not himself. He suddenly realized that today marked exactly 1 month since his beloved wife's heart had stopped beating. Everything was slipping through his fingers. He thought about his son. He had really been losing control lately. The boy needed a supportive family member, but they were growing further apart. In the evening, he decided to talk to Antonio about transferring to another educational institution. Chelo returned home late. It was already 11 o'clock at night, but he knew that his son wouldn't go to bed at this time. However, there was no response when he knocked on the door. So, Chelo entered the room and, to his surprise, discovered that Antonio was not there. Panic immediately overtook him. He was about to call the police when the inspector for juvenile affairs, who had often talked to him over the past month, called him. The man had already saved this phone number because they had talked so frequently. It turned out that Antonio was at the police station. Chelo immediately went to pick him up. The young man had been caught drinking alcohol on the street. "This is the 4th time in 2 weeks. Soon your kid will be registered with us," the inspector said. I've already told you, Antonio has slipped through my fingers. We've had a family tragedy, Chelo explained. I would like to ask you to have a conversation with him. Maybe a psychologist will be able to reason with him? The police officer turned out to be more understanding than the teachers at school. He looked at the concerned father sympathetically and crumpled up the paper with the protocol of the minor's detention. Neither a police officer nor a psychologist will help you, the inspector gently said. Believe me, I've been working here for 20 years. I've seen all sorts of delinquents. I can say with confidence that your boy is not like them. He's genuinely lost and doesn't know how else to express his protest. Only you and only a heart-to-heart conversation between father and son can bring him back to his senses. Take a day off from work, spend the day with your child, but don't leave him alone with himself anymore. You never know what else he might contemplate. Chelo thanked the police officer and went to pick up his son. He was already devising a script for their conversation, but it always ended the same way. Antonio simply distanced himself from him. Gonzalo knew his son well and understood that there was no other way. They spent the rest of the night without sleep. Antonio lay in his room, trying to make sense of everything that had happened to him in the past few weeks. Chelo was doing the same. And both of them missed Adela terribly. The boy wondered, how would Mom react to my behavior? Would she be as indifferent as Dad? Probably, it would greatly upset her. After all, she is watching over me. Tony believed that Mom was watching him from heaven. Only at that moment did he feel ashamed. His conscience was gnawing at him. At the same time, Chelo was thinking the same thing. He talked to Adela, asked her to give him advice on how to handle this situation. He apologized for losing touch with his son. It wasn't always like this. They used to love spending time together, but as Antonio grew older, he distanced himself more and more. It's hard to imagine now that they will go on a hike together again, or watch a movie together, or just sit down at the same table for dinner. People always have to let go of their adult children, but Tony had to grow up too early. Chelo wasn't ready to lose him yet. The next day, Chelo decided to finally have a conversation with his son. Even if nothing comes out of it, he would know that he tried. Surprisingly, Antonio didn't try to avoid the conversation. He sat opposite his father and listened attentively. However, the man didn't know that his son had been analyzing his own behavior all night long. Perhaps they needed to reach this breaking point to understand their mistakes, because both the father and the son had made them. Tony, as a pathologist, I can tell you how alcohol affects the body, Gonzalo began, but I understand that it won't have much impact on you. Besides, you can see that I sometimes allow myself to drink, so let's talk in a different way. You're only 15, and you've already decided to ruin your future. You sound just like our teachers, his son interrupted. That I'm good for nothing, that I'll face discipline, expulsion from school, family shame, and so on. Will there be anything new, or should I just leave? If you seriously want to lecture me about the harm of alcohol, it won't work. You're not a worthy example yourself. Chelo endured his son's sarcasm. He managed not to raise his voice. He also realized the truth in what Antonio had said. After all, he wanted to have a heart-to-heart conversation with his son, without unnecessary moralizing and insults. Even after such an indifferent response from Antonio, he still saw that the boy was willing to listen to him. As for discipline, they don't joke about it, Chelo sadly said. You don't even realize how much money I've already given to the police to keep you from being registered as a troubled kid. You were supposed to be on the record after your first visit to the station. What do you think are the consequences of that? I think you know. Antonio guiltily lowered his eyes. He had never really thought about why things always seemed to go smoothly for him. At that moment, he felt ashamed because he knew that his father wasn't so wealthy that he could bribe the police for every mistake he made. Chelo was slightly relieved when he noticed that his son realized his own wrongdoing. I understand that you're feeling bad, continued the father with more confidence. I am too. Mom's death shouldn't drive us apart. On the contrary, we need to come together to get through this difficult period hand by hand. Suddenly, Chelo's phone rang. He ignored it because they were calling from the hospital and it was his day off. A minute later, he received a message, after which he called the chief doctor, apologizing to his son. "Is he alive?" Gonzalo asked immediately. "He's alive, but injured," the chief doctor replied. "Come over, it's an urgent case. We need to process it today. Daughter of some important people. They suspect alcohol poisoning." Chelo replied that he would come right away. The message said that his partner had been in an accident, so he needed to fill in for him. He even felt a bit relieved that he was called to work with such a case. "Get ready," he told Antonio. "You're coming with me." "Where?" "To the morgue?" Antonio asked in surprise. "Yes," his father replied. "You'll get to know my profession. Maybe you'll want to become a surgeon or a pathologist too. Or some other kind of doctor. We've got 16-year-old girl. You'll see what an immoral lifestyle can lead to." Antonio didn't resist and went to get ready. Although on the way, he mentioned that he expected something different. "What did you want to hear from me?" Chelo asked. Antonio replied that he expected moral lessons, followed by silly suggestions to go fishing together, spend time together. Gonzalo laughed and was surprised. Did his son really reject the possibility of coming together? It should have been done earlier. "Now it's too late," Antonio replied. "It's never too late," Chelo said. "On the day before the surgery, Mom and I had a little argument. I told her I was a bit worried about her. She refused to listen to me. Do you think I regret that our last conversation was an argument? Do I think I should have told her words of love? It's never too late, son. We should be afraid of running out of time. We're not immortal, after all." In the city where Chelo and Antonio lived, there was a very wealthy man named Señor Fidalgo. He owned almost everything in the city and the surrounding area. Unfortunately, his wealth did not help him keep his happiness. No one is immune to tragic accidents. Eugenio had a family, a beautiful wife, a smart daughter, and even a pedigreed corgi. Their home was full of blessings. Eugene met Olivia back in school. They got married right after graduation. Eugene came from a wealthy family, Olivia was from an ordinary one. But the difference in social status did not affect their love. The couple had a daughter named Eva. Her childhood was happy, toys, treats, and travels. But it all ended when she turned 10. The family went on a trip, but only the father and the daughter returned. Olivia drowned in the ocean. It all happened in front of her husband and daughter's eyes. Lifeguards couldn't rescue the woman from the waves. They had warned that swimming was prohibited that day, but it was their last day of vacation. Olivia wanted to take a final dip in the salty water. Eugene blamed himself for allowing her to do it. She had only said she would wet her feet, but she stepped on a coral, fell, and was carried away by the waves. 3 years had passed since that dreadful tragedy. The pain had somewhat subsided. Life had to go on. Eugenio was much harder hit by the loss, but he needed to hold on only for his daughter. Eva, largely thanks to her father, had endured the loss of her mother. The man met a new woman. She was 5 years younger than him. Her name was Sylvia, and she came to his office to apply for a secretary position, but ended up with much more. Sylvia quickly captivated the businessman. He practically fell in love with her at first sight because she reminded him of his late wife in some way. Perhaps they looked similar externally, but in terms of character, they were complete opposites. Olivia was kind and compassionate, while Sylvia seemed to despise everything and everyone around her. It was astonishing how her external beauty coexisted with a terrible inner world. She was kind and submissive girl only with Eugenio, although after their wedding, she revealed her true self. Once Sylvia realized that the man wasn't going to leave her, she demanded much more attention and increased her demands. One day, she even shocked her husband with her statement that his daughter had to leave. Have you gone mad? Eugenio laughed, thinking that his wife was joking. She's barely turned 14. Where would I send her? Well, she has grandparents or other relatives, Sylvia suggested. Eugene explained that the girl only had one grandmother and she was too old to take care of a teenager. Sending the child to her aunt, the sister of the late Olivia, would be a strange decision. Eva could go abroad to study, the girlfriend voiced another option. It's very trendy these days. All the oligarchs send their kids to study in London or Paris. I heard there are excellent schools in Netherlands. Eugenio asked his wife not to bring up this topic anymore. He understood that Sylvia was not joking. It made him extremely uncomfortable that she wanted to get rid of his daughter. Of course, he could see that there was a conflict between them. Eva was 14 years old. Her character was already difficult, and now her father had brought some new woman into their home. He could understand the reasons for his daughter's behavior, but Sylvia's reaction, as an adult and seemingly intelligent woman, was somewhat alarming to him. Eva played tricks on her stepmother. To be honest, she had reasons for it. Sylvia didn't even try to be kind to her. The young woman immediately made it clear that there could only be one queen in the house. She could take away the girl's pocket money, make her wash the floors in the entire house, even though they had a housekeeper. She deliberately pushed her and bumped into her as if by accident. Sylvia wanted the girl to convince her father to send her somewhere far away, but Eva only asked that they send her stepmother. The girl told her father that Sylvia was mocking her and constantly insulting her. The man didn't believe her. He knew they hated each other, so he didn't take his daughter's words seriously. However, he believed his wife's words and accusations against his daughter because he thought that an adult couldn't lie, whereas a teenager could. Moreover, Sylvia never argued with Eva in his presence, and the daughter always had a negative attitude. The girl was sincere. She didn't pretend or wear masks, unlike her stepmother, and this angered both of them even more. Their war had been going on for 2 years, and with each passing year, it became worse and worse. The only thing that changed was that they started hiding their hatred for each other from Eugenio. He knew that they hadn't grown fond of each other, but he had no idea that they continued to play dirty tricks on each other, almost to the point of physical fights. But Sylvia had had enough of all this. She told Eva so one day. The young woman suggested making amends and peacefully figuring out how they could coexist. Eva, of course, immediately refused, stating that her stepmother was not her friend. Sylvia brought out a cake and put on the kettle, then made the offer once more. Eva laughed loudly and demonstratively. "I'm going out with my classmates today. We'll be celebrating the end of the school year," Eva replied with her head held high and left the house. Sylvia immediately turned off the kettle, threw the cake in the trash bin, and poured the coffee she had planned for Eva into the same bin. Just then, Eugenio descended from the second floor. "Why are you throwing away the treats that Eva declined?" "I would have a cup of coffee with you," he said cheerfully. "It's not edible," Sylvia replied. The man didn't understand why she couldn't share with him, but he didn't delve into the intricacies of the female mind. He thought that his wife was so upset with his daughter that she wanted to spoil the mood for everyone around. "It seems like you two need to find a common enemy," Eugenio joked. "I heard that brings people together. And who do you suggest we both hate?" "Maybe it's you?" Sylvia said with obvious irony. Her mood was written all over her face. She had been trying to get along with this girl for so long that she was tired of it. Sylvia once again asked to send her somewhere abroad so she could learn manners and how to interact with her elders, but Eugenio repeated once again that Eva wouldn't go anywhere unless she wanted to. On that day, Eugenio had an important meeting. He didn't have time for family disputes in general. Such negotiations usually ended with a continuation in a restaurant. Both Sylvia and Eva knew this. There was no need to wait for Dad at home until evening. That's why the girl agreed to go meet her classmates, because even the golden youth liked to have fun. Eugenio came home earlier than his daughter. He immediately asked Sylvia where she was. His wife lied and said that Eva was already asleep. She had a reason to isolate her stepdaughter. The woman pursued her own goals. The man went straight to bed because his condition was such that he was no longer capable of anything. The girl only came home an hour after her father. Her condition was about the same as his. Sylvia immediately went to her. She helped her take off her shoes, wash her face, and tucked her into bed. "Are you going to run to Daddy to complain now?" Eva asked, barely moving her tongue. "Stop seeing an enemy in me, go to sleep faster." "I told him that you've been in your bed for a long time," Sylvia replied. "And have a drink of this so that your father doesn't notice you have a hangover tomorrow." Eva drank the drink that Sylvia offered her. She leaned back on the pillow and pulled the blanket up to her nose. "Don't think that we're friends now," Eva said one last time. "I never planned to be friends with you." "I just don't want your father to get upset," her stepmother replied and closed the door. She couldn't keep her father from getting upset, but he didn't see his daughter with a hangover. In fact, Eva didn't wake up in the morning at all. Eugenio only remembered that the girl was still in bed after lunch. His condition wasn't the best after the evening's festivities. Sylvia had left for her beauty treatments early in the morning, manicure, pedicure, and the like. When she returned, she saw that Eugenio was sitting with his daughter in his arms. His gaze was bewildered. "I don't understand what's happening to her," said Eugenio, tears welling up in his eyes. "Why isn't she waking up?" "Oh my God!" Sylvia exclaimed. "How long have you been sitting like this?" "I don't know. I just don't know what to do," the man replied. "She's alive, she has a pulse, she's breathing, but she's not reacting to anything at all." Sylvia immediately grabbed her phone and called the clinic. Paramedics arrived for Eva, and she was taken to the hospital. Eugenio was in such shock that he couldn't think straight. Later, he couldn't even explain his own behavior to himself. He only regained his composure at the hospital when the doctor approached him. "Eva is in a deep coma," the doctor said. "I'm afraid the outcome looks grim." Sylvia immediately looked at Eugene. He had no expression on his face. He didn't even cry, he was just in shock. "What caused this?" Sylvia asked on his behalf. "The girl has a serious alcohol poisoning," the doctor replied. Eugenio was even more shocked. He couldn't understand how this could have happened since his daughter had never tried alcohol. He spent several hours sitting by his daughter's side, begging her to wake up, promising that he wouldn't scold her, but Eva didn't react at all. In the evening, he started to think. He remembered coming home at night. "You said that Eva was already asleep," Eugenio asked Sylvia. "Didn't you notice that she was drunk? If she had poisoned herself so seriously, it would have been impossible not to notice." Sylvia didn't even flinch. She wasn't at all frightened by such a logical question from her husband. It seemed that she already had an answer prepared. "When I came home, Eva was already asleep," Sylvia replied. "She told me that she was going to meet her classmates. I thought she was just tired." Eugene immediately latched onto this statement. The next day, he went to find out who Eva had been with, where they had been, and what they had been drinking. While he was conducting these inquiries, the doctor called him urgently and asked him to come to the clinic. Eugene rushed there with high hopes. He simply couldn't believe that anything could happen to his daughter. But upon arriving at the doctor's office, Eugene immediately realized that there would be no good news. The doctor's look said it all. "Unfortunately, Eva's heart stopped beating today," the doctor said with a grim expression. "She stopped fighting, and we lost her." "I want to see her," Eugene said. He didn't believe it until the very end, until he saw his daughter's body on the morgue table. The doctor prohibited him from touching his daughter, explaining that the autopsy had not been performed yet. Eugene knelt down in front of his daughter and burst into tears. The full extent of his pain was visible on his face. He groaned, pounded his fist on the floor, but it was all in vain. Eva could not be brought back. "Señor Fidalgo, we need to leave." The forensic pathologist has already arrived. He needs to work, the doctor said gently. The man got up from his knees, looked at his daughter one last time, and asked for her forgiveness. As he left the clinic, Eugene almost knocked down a young guy, and the man who was with him shouted something after him, but Eugene paid no attention to anyone. He didn't even apologize. Sylvia was sitting at home, watching TV. When Eugene entered, she immediately turned it off. The sight of her beloved terrified her. "I saw on the news that you caused a stir," she said. "The restaurant where the kids were partying got shut down for inspection." "I'll destroy them all," Eugene declared loudly. "Everyone who sold alcohol to teens, everyone who got my daughter drunk. They will all get what they deserve." Sylvia felt a bit uneasy about Eugene's tone and words, but she wanted to support her husband in some way. She still didn't know that Eva was no longer alive. "I think they must have bought it from some underground source, which is why it turned out to be contaminated," Sylvia speculated. "I don't care anymore. I'll even find the person who poured this poison into the bottle." Eugene continued to work himself up. "Eva is gone. You see, everyone I loved has left me. I've lost my entire family, and there is no longer a single person in this world who is dear to me. How can this be? The whole class was drinking, but only Eva got poisoned. This was done intentionally. I'm sure she was drugged, but the autopsy will reveal everything." Sylvia audibly gasped when Eugenio mentioned that his daughter had died. But what really struck a nerve his words about not having any loved ones left. Anger surged within her. Even in death, Eva and ex-wife were competing with her. "You have me, you know," she said in a hurt tone. "Yes," Eugene replied gloomily. "But you can't replace my daughter." Chelo quickly changed, put a robe on Antonio, and they both headed to his workplace. On their way, the chief doctor stopped them. "Chelo, I'm asking you, do everything at the highest level," the doctor said. "This is the daughter of a very big shot. He was here earlier, and I thought he would put us all in the same condition as her." "Well, probably it was him who almost broke my son's nose at the entrance," Gonzalo guessed. "And I said some nasty things to him. How embarrassing. Such a tragedy for the man. Gennady Vladimirovich, can I apologize to him later?" "It's no big deal. I think he didn't even notice you," the doctor reassured him. "He was in such a state, you know. You've also lost loved ones. But taking your son with you, that's not the right case." "He'll just sit there quietly, don't worry," Gonzalo replied. "I know my job." The men shook hands, and Chelo and Antonio continued on their way. The boy felt scared. When he entered the morgue, he thought he was ready, but in reality, it was different. But as soon as he saw the girl, his face lit up. "She's so beautiful," the young man said. "Antonio, she won't be able to appreciate your compliment now," Chelo said and lit a cigarette. He took the girl's card and began to read it aloud so that his son could hear. "Daughter of a billionaire, brought in yesterday. She was in a coma, and by morning, she had passed away. Look, even the children of billionaires are not immune to such a senseless death. Do you want to end up in her place too?" Antonio shrugged his shoulders. He was terrified. While his father turned away to continue with the preparations, the boy couldn't help but move closer to the girl. "Eva Fidalgo," Chelo was saying out loud. He stood with his back to his son and couldn't see what the boy was doing. Now it's clear whose daughter she is. Yes, he's an influential person, no doubt about it. "Eva," Antonio whispered quietly. "Dad, she doesn't look anything like the deceased. Her skin even has a normal color." "Well, she passed away just recently," Chelo continued, still not turning to face his son. "The deceased don't always look like they do in horror movies, son. Let's take a look now." Gonzalo turned around, and his cigarette fell from his mouth. He saw Antonio holding the girl's hand and looking at her with love-struck eyes. He was about to shout, but he suddenly halted his impulsive move when his son's words struck him. "Dad, she's warm," Antonio said. Is that even possible? No. This definitely shouldn't be happening, Chelo said slowly. You must be mistaken. Why are you even touching the body? Take your hands off. But his son didn't obey. He put his ear against her chest and then ran his hand over her mouth. His eyes widened, and a strange expression crossed his face, a mixture of fear and joy. Dad, she's breathing, and her heart is beating, the young man said. See for yourself. I haven't gone mad. Chelo approached Eva and checked her pulse. His eyes quickly widened, and he rushed to the chief doctor's office, but Senor Flores stopped him suddenly. He had been Eva's attending physician. Chelo, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be off today, Anton exclaimed. Renato got into an accident, and they called me in, Gonzalo quickly replied and rushed further. Senor Flores's expression changed suddenly. He quickly changed direction, heading towards the doctor's lounge. Within 5 minutes, he was sitting in his car, which refused to start. Gonzalo and Senor Molina were already descending into the morgue. Chelo, I hope you don't think I don't trust you, the chief doctor said before approaching Eva's body, but Adela already talked to you before the autopsy. Please, check for yourself, Chelo said. Senor Molina checked for a pulse and immediately took out his mobile phone. Send the orderlies to the morgue quickly. We're transferring Eva Fidalgo to the ICU. Get all her tests again, connect her to the machines. The girl is alive. The doctor ordered in a commanding tone. Send for Anton to join me. I'm sorry, but Senor Flores has already left. He said he had a burst pipe at home, the doctor on the phone replied. Then he should flood his neighbors but return here. Find him quickly. Senor Molina yelled and hung up. If Anton is involved in this, you're unlikely to catch him, Chelo said meekly. He almost fainted when he found out I was replacing Renato today. I think they were in it together. Well, I won't be able to hold Renato responsible for this either, Gennady replied. You understand whose daughter this is, right? Her father will ask questions. How am I supposed to explain this entire situation to him? Tell him it was a medical mistake, Antonio suggested, his voice trembling with fear. Only now did Gennady remember that there was also the son of one of his employees present. He got even angrier and ordered that the boy be removed from the morgue. Such a situation had occurred, and they had unnecessary witnesses. Chelo added indignantly that it was his son who pointed out that the girl was alive. You say like you wouldn't have noticed, shouted Gennady. Take the boy out of here. You'll come with me to talk to her father. Antonio waited for his dad in the doctor's lounge for several hours. He couldn't forget about this girl, approached the nurse to inquire about her condition, but, of course, no one gave him any information. Eugenio didn't want to go to the hospital. Gennady didn't tell him over the phone what they had discovered during the autopsy. It took a long time to convince the man to come. Sylvia became worried when she learned that her husband was being called back to the clinic. Do they want to mock you? Asked she. Maybe you shouldn't go? They said I need to sign some papers. They've probably already determined the exact cause of death, Eugene replied. I'll go. I'll need that report to file a complaint against the restaurant. Eugene suspected something was amiss when he saw 2 doctors in the office. Their behavior was strange, and they didn't offer him any papers. Gennady and Gonzalo were trembling with fear as they explained that Eva was indeed alive. They were afraid of his reaction. Who found out that Eva is alive? Asked Eugene, and his tone didn't reveal whether he was asking with good intentions or not. I did, Chelo answered modestly. Or rather, my son did, but I would have figured it out myself. Eugene confidently approached the pathologist. The pathologist tensed up, preparing for something unpleasant, but the wealthy man got down on his knees and hugged Xavier's legs. Thank you, he whispered. We suspect that someone has bribed our doctors, Gennady continued speaking after helping the man up and seating him on a couch. Eva's treating physician ran away, but the police are already looking for him. and the pathologist who was supposed to conduct the autopsy is in the trauma department with multiple fractures. Eugene clarified that if it weren't for Chelo, he would have buried his daughter alive. We don't know what their plans were, why they needed to do this at all, Gennady said. But most likely, Renato is involved in this. The police are already talking to him. We reported everything to the authorities first. All right, I'll wait for more information. Can I see Eva? Asked Eugene. Of course, no one could deny him that. Eugene could only look at his daughter through a small window in the door. They didn't let him into the ICU. He was told that the blood tests were incorrect. Poisonous substances were found in the girl's blood. They would have to wait for her blood to be cleansed and for Eva to regain consciousness. Don't worry. Now we know exactly what to do, said the new doctor. I assure you, there was no alcohol poisoning. Someone deliberately wanted to fake her death. Antonio stood a little apart from the businessman and the doctor. He overheard their conversation. Now he cared deeply about the girl's fate. It seemed he had fallen in love with her at first sight. When Eugene finished talking to the doctor, he noticed the boy standing modestly behind him. Aren't you the hero who prevented me from making the biggest mistake of my life? He happily asked Antonio. The boy took a step forward. He didn't want Eva's father to think of him as weak or a coward. Yes, Antonio confidently replied. But my dad would have understood anyway. It doesn't matter. The first one to see is the hero, Eugene laughed and shook the boy's hand. As a businessman, I'm telling you, never shift your merits onto others. I'm grateful to you. Eugene wanted to say a few more words to the young man, but a phone call interrupted him. It was the investigator who was questioning Renato. He reported that he wanted to talk to the girl's father. The man was crying and asking for a meeting. I need to step away, said Eugenio to Antonio, who almost jumped when the man addressed him. Watch over Eva. If there are any changes, call me. Eugenio handed his business card to the young man. Antonio, astonished, took it. Pride overwhelmed Antonio. He was given permission to look after Eva and was entrusted with some responsibility. The young man didn't move away from the ICU door as his father searched for him throughout the hospital. Eugenio entered the hospital room and saw a man with all his limbs on the right side broken. If you weren't already maimed, I would gladly have brought you to such a state, Eugene said, barely restraining his anger. Please refrain from making threats in the presence of law enforcement, the investigator said. He has every right to do so, Renato said, his words difficult to understand due to his broken jaw, but Eugene was fully attentive. Renato burst into tears and begged for forgiveness. He believed that God had punished him and prevented him from making a terrible mistake, so he decided to confess to everything and was ready to face deserved punishment. The man explained that Anton had offered him a way to make money. They were given a lot of money to lie about the patient's death. Renato had to confirm it all and administer a drug so that Eva wouldn't regain consciousness before the funeral. Eugene clenched his fists so tightly that deep nail marks remained on his palms. He asked only one question. Who? But Renato said he didn't know. All negotiations with the client were conducted by Anton. He has already been detained at the airport, the investigator added. I think we need to move to the department and talk to him. Renato asked for forgiveness again, but Eugene said he couldn't do that, although he was grateful for his confession. In the end, he added that the universe had already punished him, though he believed it was not enough. Anton didn't give up as quickly as his accomplice. He claimed that he was being framed. Renato simply wanted to avoid responsibility, so he dumped everything on him. He explained his sudden departure by saying that his mother had fallen ill in the village, so he needed to leave as soon as possible. I didn't know our doctors were making so much money that the Maldives are just a village to them, the investigator laughed. After all, your mother is there, if I understand correctly? Anton was flustered and didn't know what to say. Eugene, who had been watching the interrogation from another room all this time, was struggling to hold himself back. He begged to be allowed to see the would-be killer of his daughter, saying he would definitely extract a confession, but the police didn't allow it. However, after Eugene wrote down a certain sum on a calculator, the investigators decided to make an exception. "You wanted to bury a 16-year-old girl alive," shouted Eugene, bursting into the interrogation room. "If you have even a drop of conscience left, just nod at the right photo. If you give up the mastermind behind the crime, your sentence will be less," the investigator added. Eugene took out his phone and showed a picture of his main competitor. He turned the screen toward Anton. He stared at the picture for a long time, then looked at Eugene. He didn't make any movements. Then the man showed a photo of a happy Eva and reminded him that she was his daughter. He told him that her mother had drowned in front of her eyes. The girl already had a shattered fate. How would she restore her psyche now? He didn't know. But he knew for sure that both she and he would sleep better knowing who was behind all this. Eugene again showed a photo of the competitor. Anton thought for a moment and shook his head. Eugene immediately showed another picture, then another, and Anton replied no to all the photos. "You're just mocking me." The businessman couldn't hold back. "There are no more people who could wish me harm. Let's go for another round." "No need," Anton replied. "There was simply no photo of the right person. It was a woman, but I don't know who she is or what her name is." Eugene quickly started to recall which of the women could hate him so much. He hadn't harmed anyone. Assuming that it was the wives of his competitors would be foolish. Men never involved their loved ones in business, especially in such a dirty play. Anton began to describe the appearance of the person who wanted to harm Eva. "This can't be," Eugene said, recognizing only one person based on the description. The man showed Anton a photo of Sylvia, and he confirmed it was her. Eugene slumped onto the table and said slowly, "She should have been the first person to consider, but it's hard to believe." "Do you know this woman?" the investigator asked. "She's my wife," Eugene replied, bewildered. "But she is not Eva's mother. I met her much later." The investigator muttered, "Women are cruel creatures. Did she really do all this for money?" "I don't think so," Eugene replied, who was just staring into space, trying to gather himself bit by bit. "They hated each other, but that's a normal situation, stepmother and stepdaughter. I couldn't have imagined that their enmity would lead to this." From a state of complete loss, the phone call brought the man back. The number was unknown. Usually, he didn't answer such calls, but his situation had changed so much that he talked to anyone who called him. On the other end of the line was Antonio. The boy joyfully announced that Eva had opened her eyes. She had regained consciousness, but they still wouldn't let him in to see her. The boy said he had been sent home, and Eugene could come to see his daughter in the morning. Eugene thanked the young man and added that he would not forget his help. He saved Antonio's number because he genuinely wanted to thank him properly. At that moment, the man realized that two more people had entered his life, whom he would now consider close and family. The investigator immediately called his colleagues to inform them that the organizer of the poisoning of the girl had been identified. Eugene asked for just one thing, for him to personally confront his wife before she was taken into custody by the police. No one objected. Such a thing was not encouraged, but in this city, all doors were open to Eugene. Sylvia was waiting for her husband at home, completely unaware that her plan had been uncovered. She greeted Eugene with feigned sympathy. At that moment, the man realized what an idiot he had been. How could he not notice her deceit? How couldn't he connect the dots? Everything was so strange that night, though he could be understood, he was in such shock. Eugene hadn't forgotten how he sat with his daughter in his arms while she was unconscious, simply because he was in shock and couldn't figure out what to do. "How are things at the hospital? Why did they keep you there for so long?" Sylvia asked. "Maybe because death is a serious event?" Eugene replied, continuing to play the role of a grieving father. The man took out a bottle of brandy and 2 glasses. He poured the drink behind the bar and slowly approached his wife. He left one glass in his hand and gave the other one to the woman. "I feel so sad," he said, with a pained expression. "Let's commemorate Eva. Maybe it will make us feel better." Sylvia said that they should, of course, hold some sort of memorial. They didn't clink glasses. Eugene barely brought the drink to his lips, waited for the woman to take a greedy sip, and then placed the glass on the table. "No, you know what, I changed my mind," he suddenly said. "Have you already drunk?" "Yes," the girl replied, not understanding. "What do you mean by changed your mind? About drinking?" "No. About dying," Eugene replied, his voice suddenly changing. It sounded mocking and cruel. "How did you do it? Injected her, drugged her?" Sylvia immediately stopped. She looked at her husband with a furious gaze and jumped on him in an instant. The girl started hitting him on the head, tearing at his hair. Eugene laughed, even though it hurt him, but he was overtaken by hysterical laughter. All of this was stopped by the police, who were watching through the window. When Sylvia saw the officers, she started screaming that she needed to go to the hospital, that her husband had poisoned her, but they explained to her that she wouldn't be taken to any hospital. Finally, the woman realized that this was retaliation. In the police station, investigators had to work hard to calm Sylvia down first and then get her to confess. She didn't want to admit to what she had done. They even had to arrange a lineup. When Sylvia learned that both of her accomplices had confessed, she had no way out. She had poisoned Eva with a drink that she had given her supposedly to cure her hangover. Then the doctors took care of the rest. Anton altered the test results to hide the traces of poison in the girl's body. Renato was supposed to finish the job. Fortunately, the woman's plan failed. Now she would face the consequences of her actions. As soon as they took Sylvia away, Eugene could finally breathe. It seemed that the story was coming to an end. All that was left was to help his daughter recover and thank her saviors. In the morning, Eugene arrived at the hospital even before visiting hours began, but an exception was made for him. Eva was smiling as widely as she could in her condition. "Have you learned now what happens to those who drink questionable alcohol at unknown parties?" Eugene grumbled to his daughter. "Dad, stop it," Eva laughed. "I know what happened to me. 3 nurses and 1 orderly have already told me about it. Tell me, who was the boy looking at me through the window yesterday?" Eugene explained that there was no need to be afraid of him. He told her that this young man had saved her. But Eva replied that she wasn't scared of him. On the contrary, she liked him and wanted to meet him. Eugene arranged a meeting for her. Additionally, his daughter reminded Eugene that it wouldn't hurt to apologize to her friends. They had already cut off contact with her. Everyone was saying that her dad had scared them to death, and he had even closed the restaurant. Eugene had already forgotten about his initial desire to stage a public execution for everyone he believed was responsible for what happened to Eva. Of course, he apologized both to the kids and to the restaurant owner, who had faced significant problems. It took another investment to restore the establishment's reputation. When Eva was discharged from the hospital 2 weeks later, Eugene threw a real celebration in her honor, gathering all her friends and his own. Among the invited guests were, of course, Chelo and Antonio. Eugene hadn't organized such a meeting with so many of his friends and partners for no reason. He wanted to make an important announcement. Gonzalo even clutched his heart when he learned about the reward he and his son would receive for saving the girl. Eugene transferred part of his business to the surgeon, assuring him that there was no need to worry because experienced individuals would be in charge, and they would now be under Chelo's supervision. Additionally, Eugene was always ready to provide assistance. Antonio spent the entire evening talking to Eva, and they became friends. "Eugene, why did you give us such a gift?" Chelo humbly and shyly remarked. "I don't know anything about this business. I love my job, no matter how grim it may seem. I need financially secured son-in-law." Eugene winked and gestured towards the children, who couldn't keep their hands off each other. Eva had even forgotten about all her mates. "The whole evening with your Antonio," he said. Believe me, that's how the strongest relationships are formed. If you enjoy cutting bodies, no problem. You can continue doing your job, and when the young man comes of age, you can transfer the business to him. Gonzalo didn't know how to react to this proposal, but he understood that refusing such a gift from fate would be foolish. This story and the encounter with Eva had positively influenced Antonio. As Eugene had promised, he transferred him to another school. Now the guy was studying at an elite institution, in the same class as Eva, who was just one grade ahead. After completing school, Antonio easily gained admission to the economics faculty. He excelled in his studies and started engaging in sports. He pursued economics to be able to manage the business that Chelo had indeed transferred to him. Chelo didn't want to part with his beloved work. When Antonio turned 18, he and Eva got married. Both fathers supported them despite their young age. No one doubted the sincerity of the newlyweds' feelings. The story of their meeting was incredibly romantic, a tale to be proud of and decent story to share with their future children. But all of that lay ahead for the couple. For now, they simply loved each other and enjoyed their happy life, while Sylvia and the doctor served their prison sentences. Renato got a suspended sentence. Eugene forgave him and was grateful for his help in capturing the main culprit.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.